So I could only prepare for half the class, so I'm going to talk only about hormone receptor positive metastatic breast cancer. Maybe Navneet will give me permission to do one more class later on sometime. So I think moving on in metastatic breast cancer, we discussed a lot of it this last time, but when we see a patient who has a history of a hormone receptor breast cancer, the first thing that we do is consider repeating a biopsy, and that is because there might be a discordance between the primary diagnosis of ER positive breast cancer and the metastatic disease, and the rate of discordance where negative to positive in ER is 14% and positive becoming negative is 24%. What is more important is the negative to positive, and we don't want to miss the 14% of patients who might benefit from the new advances that we have in treatment of hormone receptor positive metastatic breast cancer. So please remember, we like to do a biopsy on these patients if they've had a history of breast cancer, because we want to catch those 14% of patients who might have changed from negative to positive for whatever reason. Second, as we all know, most of the studies that have been done with hormonal therapy, barring tamoxifen, most of the drugs that are there mainly work, and the studies have been conducted in menopausal women. So we need to have a proper definition of menopause, and I alluded to that even while talking about adjuvant hormonal therapy, because we do not want to be treating a premenopausal patient with drugs that will not work. So the definition of menopausal status is more than 60 years of age or less than 60 years with who's had a bilateral oophorectomy or who has had no periods in the preceding 12 months in the absence of chemotherapy, ovarian suppression, or tamoxifen. If they are undergoing treatment with chemotherapy or tamoxifen, then the serum estradiol levels should be in the postmenopausal range. So, summary is make sure the patient is menopausal before you consider single agent aromatase inhibitors or any other therapy. Third is the definition of ER positivity, and ASCO and CAP guidelines are very simple. If your ER is 0%, it is negative. If it is more than 10%, it is positive. And 1 to 9% is low positive, but even these patients we give the benefit of doubt, and we can try all the hormonal therapies that are available to us with the understanding that the response rates might be lower. Fourth is that nowadays we are also doing the PIK3CA testing for patients who have progressed on CDK4 inhibitor therapy or patients who have progressed on fulvestrant. So this is a test that we have to keep in mind. So there are many drugs that are being used now. We have moved beyond the endocrine therapy of tamoxifen, aromatase inhibitors, and fulvestrant. I put them all on a slide, and these are the drugs that have been approved right now for treatment. So we know the mechanism of action of most of these drugs, but again, just as a revision, the one that we are most familiar with is tamoxifen. It is called a selective estrogen receptor modulator. It has both agonist and antagonist activities. It competitively binds to the estrogen site on the estrogen receptor and prevents the activity of estrogen in stimulating the breast cancer cells. That's how tamoxifen works. Fulvestrant is kind of similar in action. It does not have any, it is an antagonist. It does not have any agonist action on the other tissues. In addition, fulvestrant also is a down regulator. What it means is that it decreases the number of estrogen receptors. So there is an additional action of the fulvestrant. Third is the aromatase inhibitors, and these mainly work in patients with in postmenopausal women, because what the mechanism of action is inhibiting the aromatase enzyme and the peripheral conversion, the conversion in the blood of androgens to estrogen, which is the main source of estrogen in menopausal women. So postmenopausal women, aromatase inhibitors work very well. So these are the main drugs that are available for hormone receptor positive metastatic breast cancer. We also have learned over time that independent of the binding of estrogen to the estrogen receptor. So that is a ligand independent. There is an activation of the estrogen receptor, and that is mainly through these two pathways. One is the PI3K AKT mTOR pathway, and the RAS-RAF MEK-MAP pathway. So when we discussed about these pathways, even when we were talking about HER2 positive breast cancers, right? So here the PI3 AKT mTOR pathway can also stimulate and cause the downstream signaling, which leads to cell cycle regulation, differentiation, apoptosis, and angiogenesis. So because this is independent of estrogen binding to the estrogen receptor, we can in advanced diseases which have progressed on these medications, we can think about these inhibitors and see if they will respond or not. The other drug, which is has created quite a buzz in the last 4 to 5 years, are the CDK4/6 inhibitors. What they do is that they prevent the cell cycle progression. So they cause a block in the cell cycle from the G to the S phase and prevent the proliferation of the cell cycle. So these are some other drugs that have been that are now included in the treatment of patients who are hormone receptor positive. So we'll talk basically in terms of what is the first line therapy nowadays, then the second line therapy. Is there an optimal sequencing of endocrine-based therapies in metastatic breast cancer? And is there any role at all for chemotherapy in hormone receptor breast cancer? So coming to the first line therapy, again a little bit of history. I think in our setting, when I talk a little more about the past, it is important because we do not have access to many of these drugs. We do not have access because one, they might not be available. Second is they might not be affordable also. So for whatever reason, we have to rely on the old data when we are looking at our patients and deciding whether you should give a particular drug or not. So the first line for a very long time for patients with metastatic breast cancer was tamoxifen. And this was in the 70s and the 80s. And then in the 90s entered the aromatase inhibitors. And multiple trials were done to look at tamoxifen versus aromatase inhibitors in metastatic breast cancer. And all the three aromatase inhibitors, the anastrozole, letrozole, and exemestane, were studied against tamoxifen. And what did we find was that across the board, there was a modest improvement in overall response rate. Definitely, there was an improvement. There was also an improvement in time to progression, but not by a whole lot. And there was a clinical benefit. Clinical benefit means overall response plus stable disease. So there was an improvement in response rate, improvement in clinical benefit, and there was an improvement in time to treatment failure by around 4 months. So when we give an aromatase inhibitor instead of a tamoxifen, what we are seeing overall across the board is a 4-month improvement in overall time to tumor progression. Overall survival data has not panned out yet in the single studies that were done. So what do we know about aromatase inhibitors? All three aromatase inhibitors showed higher response rate and TTP compared to tamoxifen, but there have not been any differences in long-term overall survival. Is there an efficacy of aromatase inhibitors after tamoxifen? Yes. And there is also an efficacy of tamoxifen after aromatase inhibitors. Again, important because many of our patients who cannot afford the other drugs, we do try and put them on one of these. There was also a study, and this is by Bertolli and group in Oncology 2005, where they looked at both combinations. One was non-steroidal aromatase inhibitor followed by exemestane, and exemestane followed by the AIs, anastrozole or letrozole, and either way was effective in terms of the clinical benefit that they were seeing. So these are drugs that we can still continue to use in today's world also. Then after the aromatase inhibitors came another drug called the fulvestrant, which we discussed, which is the selective estrogen receptor degrader. So it decreases the estrogen receptor levels in the cell. And for a long time, there was discussion about the dose of fulvestrant that should be given. The initial studies all had 250 milligrams of fulvestrant, but later on, it was thought that a higher dose might be more effective. And this is the confirmed study where they looked at women, postmenopausal women, who progressed on endocrine therapy and compared 250 to 500 milligrams of fulvestrant. So fulvestrant is given, as you know, day 1, day 15, and then every month, starting day 28. And what they found was that the 500 milligram dose was more effective than the 250 milligram dose, with a 4.1 month improvement in overall survival. So right now, if we, based on the confirmed study, if we want to use fulvestrant as monotherapy, 500 milligrams is the preferable dose, and that is the benefit that we get. Now, is fulvestrant better than an aromatase inhibitor in the first line? And because of the dose issues, the initial studies that were done comparing fulvestrant 250 to anastrozole and to exemestane, when you look at the progression-free survival, it's bang on the same. Not much of a difference. Definitely not very statistically significant. So fulvestrant, when used in the lower dose, is probably just equal to an AI. But the Falcon trial that came later on, which included patients with hormone receptor positive advanced breast cancer who had more sensitive tumor with and without prior endocrine therapy, in these patients they looked at fulvestrant 500 mg versus anastrozole. And here overall there was definitely an improvement in progression-free survival, 13.8 months versus 16.6. So that's a modest improvement. But when they looked at the subgroup analysis, it looked like patients without visceral disease, that is the bone only metastasis, seem to be benefiting most from the fulvestrant 500 mg group. So that is one group where we can think maybe about giving fulvestrant upfront instead of an anastrozole. What about if we use the combination of the drugs? So this was also something that was looked at, and all these trials are before the CDK4 inhibitors came in play. So they were looking at different things, which sequencing of aromatase inhibitors, how to incorporate fulvestrant. And this is a study called the SWOG 0226 study, where they looked at a combination of anastrozole and fulvestrant in patients with previously untreated metastatic disease. So this is also a first line study. Here they used the 500 milligram dose of fulvestrant along with anastrozole. So initially there was not an improvement in overall survival, but later on the recent study that was published in New England Journal last year showed that with the combination there was an improvement in overall survival compared to fulvestrant alone. So if you look at the numbers here, in the total trial population, there is a difference, absolute improvement of about 7.8 months, which is statistically significant. It appears that patients who had not received any prior endocrine therapy, so the ones who are endocrine naive, they had a greater benefit. Here, the anastrozole only was 40.3 months, but when you added fulvestrant, there was an improvement by another 12 months. So almost a year. So this is in endocrine naive patients. So in that subgroup analysis, they found that patients who had not received endocrine treatment in the past seem to be benefiting more. So fulvestrant plus anastrozole is also an option that we should be thinking about. Then came the CDK4 and 6 inhibitors, and we discussed briefly the mechanism of action. There are 3 CDK4/6 inhibitors right now: palbociclib, ribociclib, and abemaciclib. All of them have been tested in the first line against an aromatase inhibitor, which is letrozole. And across the board, if you see, there is a definite improvement in the overall response rate and also an improvement in the progression-free survival by almost 10 months. So all 3 trials, which were the first line studies, there was about a 10-month improvement in progression-free survival. So if you look at tamoxifen versus an aromatase inhibitor, a 4-month improvement. Aromatase inhibitor versus a fulvestrant 500 mg, another 4-month improvement. Here, aromatase inhibitor versus a CDK4 inhibitor combination, another 10-month improvement in progression-free survival. And across the trials, the hazard ratio is the same. So the result is very consistent. So these are the main trials: the Paloma trial, the Mona Lisa trial, and the Monarch trial, looking at palbociclib, ribociclib, and abemaciclib, all of them showing an improvement in the progression-free survival. Is there any patient who particularly benefits from this combination? And when you look at the subgroup analysis, it's very clear that regardless of the patient's age, race, whether they had visceral disease or non-visceral disease, and see a fair number of patients had visceral disease. So these are not just low-risk patients, whether they received prior hormonal therapy in the adjuvant setting or not, their performance status, bone disease, number of metastatic sites, regardless of what subgroup they belong to, everyone seems to be benefiting equally from the combination of CDK4 inhibitor plus letrozole. So the thing to remember here is, again, like we discussed in the adjuvant setting, the absolute benefit might differ from patient to patient, but the relative benefit that is there in the combination is seen in all subgroups. The other question asked was whether fulvestrant with a CDK4 inhibitor would be better than a letrozole and a CDK4 inhibitor, because we think, somehow we feel that fulvestrant might be a better drug than an aromatase inhibitor. And this was looked in the Parsifal trial, and there was not much of a difference in the progression-free survival between the two arms. Okay. Is there any overall survival improvement, or are we limited just to PFS in patients where we are giving CDK4 inhibitors? And in the last 2 years, we've had both the studies with ribociclib in it, the Mona Lisa 3 and the Mona Lisa 7 study, which have shown an improvement in overall survival also. So this is the Mona Lisa 3 study design, where patients were given ribociclib versus and fulvestrant versus fulvestrant alone. This is the Mona Lisa 7, which looked at a different patient population, which is the pre and perimenopausal women who had not received any prior endocrine therapy, and again randomized them to ribociclib plus an ovarian suppression and tamoxifen versus a placebo plus ovarian suppression and tamoxifen, and again looked at progression-free survival and overall survival. And both these studies, the 3 and the 7, showed an improvement and a survival benefit. So in the first line therapy of hormone receptor positive metastatic breast cancer, we have multiple options that are there. And what do we know? We know that hormonal therapy improves survival in patients with hormone receptor metastatic breast cancer. Aromatase inhibitors improve progression-free survival by 4 to 6 months. Fulvestrant is an active agent in patients resistant to tamoxifen and AIs. 500 mg is the preferred dose. In the second line setting, 250 mg is equal to the AI. But if you are giving 500 mg of fulvestrant, it is likely better than giving anastrozole in terms of progression-free survival. And fulvestrant plus AI in the first line metastatic breast cancer has shown improvement in overall survival. This is probably a regimen that we won't be using very often, maybe in patients who are very frail, where we are worried even about that little bit of neutropenia, or if they have some cardiac problems, some issues where we cannot give a CDK4 inhibitor, but we want a good response. This might be a combination that we can think about. Further on, CDK4 inhibitors with AIs have consistently shown an improvement in progression-free survival. We have seen improvements in overall survival also in the Mona Lisa 3 and 7 studies, and the relative benefit is maintained across all subgroups, regardless of their menopausal status, bone-only disease, visceral disease, is it de novo, is it post-adjuvant, regardless of that, everybody is benefiting from the CDK4. And similar outcomes in first line for fulvestrant or AI as an endocrine partner for these inhibitors. Now, the question that we ask, and which is discussed in a lot of the conferences, for which I don't think we will have any answer from a study as such, is there a subset of patients who will do very well with AI alone? As you know, in our clinic, when we see patients, we always have a few patients who are on hormonal therapy forever. who come with bone-only disease and they have been on their anastrozole or letrozole for 3 years, 4 years. So there are a group of patients who might probably not need both the expense and the toxicities that come with a CDK4 inhibitor. So who are these patients? And we can guess that these would be patients who are endocrine naive, have low volume disease and low tumor burden. So if a patient comes to me, recently I had a patient who came for a surgery for her breast tumor and had a PET CT scan done, and we found that she had 3 lesions in the bone. So this is a patient maybe who will do well with aromatase inhibitor alone. So, as such, the combination is the preferred regimen, and the combination is what is recommended by all guidelines. But keeping cost issues also in mind, there might be this group of people who will do very well with aromatase inhibitor alone. Moving on to second line, what next once disease progresses? So, in today's world, we have 2 types of second line patients. One are patients who have already received a CDK4 inhibitor and endocrine therapy in the first line. And the second are the patients who we see more commonly in our clinic, those who have not received CDK4 because of various reasons. Now, the initial studies that were done looked at CDK4 inhibitors in the second line. And these are, again, all 3 molecules have been tested, palbo, abemaciclib and ribociclib in the second line, along with the logical partner, fulvestrant. And everywhere there was across the board, again, an improvement in response rate and an improvement in progression-free survival. However, if you look at the number as such, the progression-free survival is different. Unlike in the first line studies, in the second line studies, we are seeing a different numbers. And why is that? Because the kind of patients who were tested in the second line are different when we see from trial to trial. So Mona Lisa study, if you see, they got the maximum benefit from AI plus fulvestrant, and Paloma 3 trial got the least amount of benefit from the AI plus palbociclib regimen. And if we have to see the inclusion criteria, ribociclib, the patients in the Mona Lisa study were quite hormone receptor sensitive compared to the others. So the relapse was greater than 12 months after adjuvant or relapsed on adjuvant. So they had all kinds of patients. They had a sensitive group also here. Meanwhile, if you look at the Paloma study, this was a very resistant group where they had relapsed on adjuvant therapy, or they had received multiple lines of endocrine therapy in the past, or they had received 1 line of chemotherapy in the past. So these are patients who are further on in their disease cycle. So, and abemaciclib was kind of in between, which is why probably we are seeing the differences in the progression-free survival between the 3 studies. Nevertheless, in any of these patients, if you are giving a combination of fulvestrant with CDK4/6 inhibitors, they are benefiting from the combination. Now, what are there any differences between each CDK4 inhibitor? And universally, all 3 of them can cause neutropenia. So probably abemaciclib has less neutropenia than palbo and ribo, but all 3 of them, the side effect and the most common one is that of neutropenia. Important to remember, we don't see so much febrile neutropenia, but neutropenia is something that we look for, and we check the CBP every 2 weeks for the first 2 months and make the appropriate dose changes. QT prolongation is something we have to take care of in patients who are receiving ribociclib. QT prolongation and hepatobiliary toxicity. So every patient needs to have an ECG checked at baseline and also liver function test checked. So if it is a patient with liver issues, then better to go with palbociclib than with abemaciclib or ribociclib. If it's a patient who has cardiac problems, then better to go with the other 2 drugs rather than ribociclib. Abemaciclib can also cause thrombosis or pulmonary embolism, so that is something to look out for. All 3 drugs can cause ILD and pneumonitis. So there is a difference in the side effect profile which will help us choose which drug to use. But again, important to remember is the efficacy of all 3 drugs seems to be similar. So coming to the next, we had discussed the ligand independent activation of these pathways, the PI3 kinase, AKT, mTOR pathway, and how we can use this knowledge to develop new drugs. So the PI3 kinase inhibitors are the ones that we are using right now is mainly alpelisib, and this is the AKT inhibitor, capivasertib, and the mTOR inhibitor, everolimus. So little bit about the studies that were done with each of these drugs. Also, the mutations, the PIK3CA mutation is most common in ER positive patients, which is why this was the group where this drug was studied, and this is what should be tested in all our patients. So coming to the everolimus drug, it's an mTOR inhibitor, and this was studied in second line in patients who had progressed on letrozole or anastrozole. So AI progressed patients where a combination of exemestane and everolimus was given in comparison to exemestane alone. So I want to bring your attention to two things. One is there seems to be an improvement in progression-free survival. So by about 4 months, which was statistically significant. At the 18-month analysis also, there was a improvement in progression-free survival from 3.2 to 7.8 months. So, two things that are important in this. One is for those patients where we are not able to give everolimus who progress on letrozole or anastrozole. Remember that when you shift them to exemestane, the median progression-free survival is only 2.8 months. So that is what we have to explain to our patients in terms of prognosis. The response rate is also only 1.7%. So there is an improvement in response rate, there is an improvement in clinical benefit rate, stable disease, and an improvement in progression-free survival. We have not seen an overall survival improvement with this combination. Now, logically, you would think fulvestrant is the drug that we use most commonly in second line. So what about a combination of fulvestrant and everolimus? And again, here there was an improvement in response rate and a clinical benefit rate, and there was not much of a difference in the overall survival, but there was definitely an improvement in progression-free survival by about 5 months. So either combination is something that we can think about in patients who have progressed on AI. So these are the 3 studies that have been done for everolimus, and all of them have been statistically significant. So everolimus with fulvestrant, everolimus with tamoxifen, everolimus with exemestane. What do we worry about with everolimus? One is the most common one is stomatitis, and it seems that with time we've gotten better at figuring out how to treat it. There is something called a magic mouthwash. There are dexamethasone mouthwashes, which when we give the patients, there is decreased stomatitis because it can be quite a debilitating side effect. The rest are like any other small molecule inhibitors: diarrhea, rash, fatigue. Pneumonitis is also something not very common, but grade 4 pneumonitis, grade 3 and 4 is around 4%. So we have to be very watch out keenly for the symptom, and if a patient is complaining of shortness of breath or cough, think about pneumonitis. The second inhibitor is the PIK3 kinase inhibitor, and that is alpelisib. And this was looked at in patients both in PIK3 mutant and non-mutant cohort, where we looked at the combination of the drugs versus fulvestrant alone. In the non-mutant cohort, there was not an improvement in the progression-free survival, but in the mutant cohort, there was definitely an improvement in the progression-free survival, again by about 5 months. Okay. And this in the baseline characteristics, prior CDK4 inhibitor was seen only in 5% of the patients. So the question is, what happens if a patient has already received CDK4 inhibitors? Will they still respond, and will they still have a 5-month improvement in PFS? Remains to be seen. And so again, all subgroups responded very well to this combination. And based on this trial, the SOLAR 1 trial, alpelisib was approved as a treatment in combination with fulvestrant. And this is a drug that we are now getting through patient assistance programs in our country. So this is something, this data and the side effects that we should be aware of. For most patients, how do we test for the PIK3 mutation? It's mainly through a blood test, if possible, and if the blood test is negative, then we can do a tissue test also. Side effects, again, hyperglycemia and diarrhea, stomatitis are the common side effects. And again, there are very nice protocols on how to manage the hyperglycemia for patients with alpelisib. So we just have to follow that. Last is the AKT inhibitor, capivasertib. And this again in combination with fulvestrant in patients in second line who had progressed on aromatase inhibitor. Again, a 5-month improvement in progression-free survival. And this was FDA approved. Lastly, patients who have progressed on multiple lines of treatment, is there any role of single agent CDK4 inhibitor? And abemaciclib was tested in this setting. Abemaciclib is also given a little differently from palbo and ribo. Both of those are 3 weeks on, 1 week off. This is a continuous regimen, morning and evening. So in this patient group, if you see, a lot of these are heavily treated patients where they have received multiple endocrine regimens. Many of them have received multiple chemotherapy regimens, and 90% of the patients had visceral metastasis, 70% had liver metastasis. So this is a high disease burden group. And in these patients, when single agent abemaciclib was given, there was a decent response rate of about 20%, and stable disease in another 22% of the patients. So the overall clinical benefit rate is 42%. More important, the duration of response was on the median duration was around 8.6 months. And at this end of 6 months, there were 70% of the patients who still did not have progressive disease. So this is good data and something to think about in patients who have progressed on multiple lines of treatment and have not received a CDK4 in the past. Abemaciclib is something to consider. I think it will be coming to our country in the next 2-3 months because there are a lot of webinars on abemaciclib going along. So this is a drug to watch out for. So to conclude, for second line therapy for patients progressing on AI, fulvestrant with CDK4/6 inhibitors improves progression-free survival. Understanding the resistance pathways to hormonal therapy, we now have multiple second line options which include everolimus, alpelisib and capivasertib. Important to remember that most patients in second line studies did not receive CDK4/6 inhibitors in the first line. So how strong and robust is that data in today's world? Maybe it is applicable to our country still, but in the Western world, that is a question that is being asked. The other is that this combination has not been compared to fulvestrant alone or fulvestrant plus AI or fulvestrant plus another CDK4/6 inhibitor. So these are also options that we use very commonly. Which is the best option to give? We don't know. And what is the optimal sequencing? Like I said, there are a group of patients who do very well on a single agent aromatase inhibitor. So should we just give this CDK4 in a second line? So this optimal sequencing of therapy remains a debate. And what do we like? We can continue trastuzumab beyond progression. Should we be continuing CDK4/6 beyond progression? So these are the questions for which we do not have very good answers yet. This is the SONIA study. We are waiting. It is still recruiting, I think, and we are waiting for the report of this study where it's looking at the which fulvestrant first or fulvestrant next, first line or second line CDK4 inhibitor is what we are looking at with the SONIA study. So this is something we are waiting for. This is the BYLieve study which was presented in ASCO this year. So remember I said in the prior second line studies, CDK4 inhibitor was used only in 5 to 6% of the patients. So these are patients in this study, or in the BYLieve study, these are patients who have progressed on CDK4 inhibitor, so have received prior treatment with CDK4 and endocrine therapy and received systemic chemotherapy. Here they put them in 3 cohorts to test alpelisib plus fulvestrant, alpelisib letrozole, and then alpelisib plus fulvestrant in a different setting. Patients who had received prior AI and CT or ET. So one cohort, the first cohort of patients where they received this combination of alpelisib and fulvestrant, when they looked at the patients alive without progressive disease at 6 months, it was 50.4%. very similar to the Solar One data that we discussed. And the median progression-free survival was 7.3 months. So the conclusion of this trial is that the data is similar to that of Solar One, and this BILEAP trial also supports the use of this combination in patients with mutated HR positive advanced breast cancer post CDK4/6. Second question we asked was, should it be continued beyond progression, right? And these are the studies that are there to look at the role of a CDK4 inhibitor beyond progression, and the results are still awaited. Finally, what is the role of chemotherapy in hormone receptor positive metastatic breast cancer? And according to the current ESMO and ASCO guidelines, we give chemotherapy only in patients who are either resistant to endocrine or they have a visceral crisis. And we discussed what visceral crisis was in the last class. So those are the indications for chemotherapy. Otherwise, endocrine therapy is preferred to chemotherapy in first line and second line and on further progressions also. So we give one endocrine therapy after the other. Why? Because there is a better quality of life, greater satisfaction, lesser side effects. Most of it is oral therapy, barring fulvestrant. So definitely it is a better experience being on hormonal therapy. It does not seem to be affecting the overall survival. So we are limiting chemotherapy to patients who are resistant to endocrine therapy. These are patients who have progressed on 2-3 lines of endocrine therapy. That is where we try chemotherapy. And patients who have a lot of visceral tumor where we want a fast disease control. In those patients, we can always go back to endocrine therapy as a maintenance. Now, this was based on these conclusions and guidelines have been in place for the past many years, or even the 2016, before the palbociclib data had come out. These were the guidelines that we should be using upfront hormonal therapy more than chemotherapy. Does it change with this, with the CDK4 inhibitors? This is one study where, this is a Korean study where they looked at the combination of palbociclib, exemestane and leuprolide. So this is in a group of premenopausal women. These are all high-risk women who have metastatic breast or locally advanced, who have progressed on, who have received tamoxifen in the past. So in these patients, when they compared the CDK4 inhibitor with capecitabine, which is the standard of care for those who are resistant to anthracyclines and taxanes. So these patients also, what they found was there was actually an improvement in progression-free survival in patients who got the CDK4 inhibitor. So it was actually better than giving the chemotherapy, even though there were not much differences in overall response rate and clinical benefit rate. So definitely this study also gives us the added data that is needed to be confident and give targeted therapy rather than chemotherapy. There is a similar study called Pearl study which looks at menopausal women and much older women, and I have not presented there, again with same data that compared to chemotherapy, this combination is probably a better option. So to conclude, we have come a long way in the treatment landscape of hormone receptor positive breast cancer, starting from tamoxifen to AIs, fulvestrant, higher dose fulvestrant, and then the CDK4 inhibitors and the inhibitors of the PIK3 mTOR-AKT pathway. So when we are choosing for, when we have so many options and so many options that have not been compared to each other, like alpelisib has not been compared to everolimus. So there we have multiple verticals of treatment. How do we choose for our particular patient? Treatment has, we have to think about a lot of things. We do, like I mentioned before, look at the organ function. Is there visceral crisis? Where is the disease? What is the disease-free interval for the patient? What do I think is the endocrine sensitivity of this patient? What is the amount, level of estrogen receptor in the tissue? And the patient, what are the comorbidities of the patient? How did she tolerate prior treatment? What is the quality of life? So we have to look both at disease factors, patient factors, tumor factors, and then come to a decision on for that particular patient, what do we do? Especially in the second and third line, all these factors become more important than in the first line therapy. So we are moving towards personalization, and we will, I think, be using more and more maybe next-gen sequencing. We'll be looking at ESR mutations, PIK3CA mutations for patients to know which patient will benefit from which drug the most. As a last thing, we are also looking at trastuzumab deruxtecan. We discussed that for HER2 positive patients and how the Destiny study showed a very good response in these patients. And so they are looking at it even in patients with HER2 low disease, so in ER positive patients. And when, if I get a chance to talk about triple negative, we will talk about PARP inhibitors and sacituzumab over there also. So we have multiple treatment options now for hormone receptor patients, and it is not unusual to see these patients surviving even 4, 5, or many more years after a diagnosis of a metastatic breast cancer. So yeah, I'll stop there and thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Any questions are there? You can unmute and ask.
Hello.
Yes, Dr. Manish.
Yeah, good evening, ma'am. Ma'am, excellent presentation, ma'am. Ma'am, need one doubt. If a patient is resistant for AI inhibitors, shall we give tamoxifen?
Yeah, so we can give tamoxifen if they are after progression, and that was one of the slides that I had talked about in the beginning. But the response rate won't be great. Okay, it will be around maybe 10%, but that is still an improvement. Many patients we might get some stable disease also, so it is definitely an option.
And then one more question, ma'am. When we are giving AI inhibitors with fulvestrant or CDK4/6 inhibitors in premenopausal lady, whether we check E2 FSH before starting the therapy, or we consider it as a post-menopausal?
No, when we are giving it in premenopausal, we have to make them postmenopausal. So all premenopausal patients, we need to do some sort of an ovarian suppression, which can be oophorectomy, which can be leuprolide or goserelin injections. Monthly is the preferred way of doing it, or an ovarian radiation also. If the patient is having radiation to some vertebra for pain, we could think about doing that. But we have to do ovarian suppression, make the patient menopausal, and only then give the patient AI with or fulvestrant based therapy.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Any more questions?
Okay.
So thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, and sorry about the triple negative, didn't get the time.
Next class. Thank you so much.
Thank you.